Hello, hello. Oh man, it's been a while. What's up, everybody? How we doing? It's I'm back on stream, back on StreamYard. There's been some updates. I'm still kind of getting used to the UI and everything. What's up, Michael? I see you already in the chat there. Yeah, we have a super exciting episode going on today. Before we get into it, how's everybody doing? What's the weather like where you're at? This is that in between where in the midst of if you have kids, if your kids are going back to school or if they're in school, in the midst of all of that, we also are dealing with sort of the seasons changing and which means for me, schedules change. I'm back in my home office instead of the co-working space. But no, it feels good to be here. Thanks for showing up. In terms of the episode that we have going on today, super fun. A big, often requested feature is, hey, we have Amplify on the front end, which is really nice for creating out these UIs, whether you're using the UI components or you're using the Amplify libraries, etc. But we also have the flexibility, or we want the flexibility of using the CDK. Maybe your backend team is already familiar with the CDK. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. How do you combine these two worlds? And it turns out you can get all the benefits from Amplify for use to the Amplify CLI or the studio. And as with all things software development, it's really about trade-offs, right? With Amplify Studio, you get this really fantastic way of building out your front ends or creating a back end for your front end, all through this sort of click and just sort of create what you want interface. And then you drop down to the CLI and you have this really cool way of just specifying exactly what you want with a few terminal commands. Super cool. But when you want that power, right? When you want that flexibility, when you want the ability to take things and create things outside of the Amplify ecosystem in a way where it all makes logical sense to your backend folks, that's when we reach for the CDK. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So super cool topic. Super awesome to have you all here. Let me know in the chat what's going on. I think we're on YouTube and Twitch today. So keep me posted. I'm always eager to know what everybody's up to these days. With that, any other updates? Can't think of any. I was going to be in Chicago this week for the summit, but I'm not going to be able to make it with all this back to school madness and back to school activities. My son's in football now. So let's go ahead and jump into it. I think the way that we're probably going to be reasoning about this is that we have a front end, and we'll just pick any front end, right? It's not really the focal point, since we're just going to be tying in the Amplify libraries with that. So we'll pick any front end. I'm going to shoot for Next.js just because it's what I'm using these days. And then we'll create another repo or another project, which is going to be our CDK project. And we'll be using that to create all of our constructs. So let's just, for the folks that are new here, let's go ahead and just make a quick distinction that with Amplify, you have this amazing way to create full stack applications. With the CDK, you have this amazing way to create backend, what are known as constructs. And these constructs are services that AWS provides, but with sort of reasonable defaults. And if that sounds familiar, well, that's a lot like what Amplify does. And in fact, some of the services or some of the ways that Amplify creates these resources is in fact via the CDK. So we're not too far off into the weeds of what's possible. So we have two projects going on today. We have the front end project. Let me get my screens right so that I'm not looking everywhere. So I'm going to share my screen here and let's see what we got. Share screen. Boom. Boom. Cool. So we're going to be here in the terminal. I'm going to create, again, two repos here. We'll just call this something like, we'll do it all in one directory, right? Streaming fun. And we'll just CD into that. Now, in this first one, we'll just call this our front end here. Super creative. So we'll say npx create next app, and then we'll just call this front end stream. And we'll go ahead and kick that off. That's going to do its thing. And then on the back end, we're going to initialize a CDK application. If you're not used to the CDK, or if you haven't tried it out before, I should probably explain my acronyms, right? CDK, Cloud Development Kit. It's a way that AWS came out with just another way of creating these backend services. If you're not familiar with that or constructs, don't worry. It's going to make a whole lot of sense. It's basically a bunch of functions and utilities that we can bring into our projects, but super, super popular. And I encourage folks to check it out. So we have that. And then in terms of our other application for the backend repo, let's kick this off by saying something like, with the CDK, you got to create the directory first. So this will be backend stream, I suppose. And then we'll just cd into that. So how you specify that is you want to make sure that you have the CDK installed in your application. Now, a couple ways to do it. You can do it globally, or you can do it with npx. I'm going to say npx here, just because I don't want to install it globally. And it's AWS CDK init, and then you want to specify the language, because the differentiating factor between the CDK and other applications or other types of creating your backend service is that you can support many different languages. You can write this in JavaScript, TypeScript. I'm going to throw some out there. Correct me if I'm wrong, chat, but we're going to go with C#, Python, and Rust, maybe. I'm going to say the language here, though, is TypeScript. That should be enough to go ahead and kickstart this application. And it's sort of spitting out some things inside of the terminal, looking good, fine and dandy. But for the most part, we're going to touch base on the front end. We'll talk about how do you get this back end set up for your front end, okay? But for the most part, we're going to be working inside of this application right here. So it makes sense that I open this up in VS Code. Uh-oh, I didn't specify the dot. So it's going to bring in everything. Let's head back here. Code dot. Here we go. Thank you. Yeah. So I was struggling hard on those languages, but as Jay pointed out, we have Dart support as well. So you really get this flexibility. Dart, for all you folks that might be unaware, way to create your mobile applications. So let's bump this up so everybody can see it. Let me know if this is a good size. Is one more too big? We'll try that. So as we look at sort of the anatomy of a CDK application, not too much going on. I picked TypeScript, so we have a TypeScript config. It's just talking about all the things that make up our application, what we support out of the box. Tests, we're not going to be working on tests today. But then we also have, our package.json, super slim. It's going to go ahead and bundle up our TypeScript application for us. And then the main parts that we want to be focusing on today are going to be this lib directory. We're going to create this in sort of a composable way, and I'll talk about how do you modularize your CDK applications so that they make sense. You don't have just one long file with all of your backend services. You probably want to split that up. And then we have this bin directory, and this is sort of the heart of our application, even though we're going to be spending most of our time in this lib directory. But if you take a look at them, super, super simple. We're dealing with the class here. You can sort of get an idea of what it's like to create maybe your very first construct if you haven't created one before. So this is an SQSQ, sort of that messaging service. You just say, hey, I want to specify a new one. The context is this class that we're working in. You give it a name, and then you just specify a bunch of parameters, key values of how you want to get this set up. Pretty cool. In my opinion, fairly straightforward as someone who's worked a whole lot in JavaScript, AWS, and TypeScript. So if you have that combination, then this makes a whole lot of sense. And then you have our bin directory where all this stuff might look intimidating, but it's really just a bunch of comments. And it's just talking about how do you want to create this backend? What account are you using? What region are you going to be putting this in, etc. Pretty cool stuff. I'm not going to be specifying anything in here. As a matter of fact, we're going to delete this in just a moment because I'm just going to have it use my default account for these demo purposes that we're in. So if you see me looking off to the side, I do have a bunch of I would call them helpers, I guess, full stack CDK helpers. I can share this out into the stream for folks that might find it useful. There you go. And what that's going to enable you to do is sort of reference what we're building on today. So it looks like some folks are already building this in their applications. Super cool. This is sort of what Amplify has in terms of preferred settings. That way you can take advantage of it too. So let's kick things off. We're going to build an application that has probably some of the key pieces that any app will be looking for. We're going to have Cognito. Okay, we're going to create Cognito from the backend, and then we're going to just easily integrate it in our front end. We're going to have a database. I think every application needs a way to persist stuff. And we're going to have an API, right? Time permitting. And just to make things more fun, let's use Appsync. I think one of the hello world things that you do when you start working with the CDK is, Lambda API Gateway DynamoDB. But if you are working with Amplify, chances are you are working with Appsync, just because that's a service that makes things really, really easy in terms of talking to backend services. So we're not going to skimp on that. We're going to go with Appsync, and we'll show you how to create all of that. Okay, first things first, let's create this authentication piece. And I mentioned that I'm going to be using, what are we doing here? Over in this lib directory, we had this idea of stacks. So a stack is just a logical grouping of your backend. And in this case, we're going to have what's called an auth stack. So I'm going to take this piece right here, and I'm going to rename it to auth stack. And I'm still working in TypeScript here. So I have this set up. I know I'm going to need to import probably some packages, but this is coming from the repo. So I'm going to paste it in here. And again, I encourage you to check it out. But let's walk through what we have here. And let's just kind of get to the meaty bits. Let me keep an eye on the chat over here. Okay, so this is our sort of Cognito piece. We'll come back on the imports. We are saying, hey, we're going to expose, so public read only. We're going to let other stacks that we create have access to our identity pool. And in this case, I'm going to take this part out because we're not going to have an identity pool. Or this. We could touch on that in another episode. But really, we want our backend services like our API, for example. If it's going to be protected by a user pool, then it needs access to read the user pool. And I'll show you how we do that in just a moment. But for the most part, it's really everything after this constructor super call. We're going to create a new user pool right here. And just to keep things simple, we can call this something like, whoa, if I can scroll today. We're going to call this something like, my Twitch user pool. Cool. And these are all of the recommended settings that you would get if you were doing something from the CLI, from Amplify Studio, or even from the AWS console. Right? Are you allowed to have your own users sign themselves up? Makes sense if you have a front end. Yes, I wanted to go ahead and do that. Now, if they forget their password, do you have the ability to send it to phone or email? Absolutely. How are they verifying? We're going to send them a code via email. All the same things are here, right? Email, we need to go ahead and input that. I do have a little snippet here in case we wanted to add incognito groups. For the sake of time, just me being long-winded in my explanations, I'm going to go ahead and delete this part. But just note that in that sample repo, I even included a handy way of doing that. We take that user pool, we put it in a user pool client. And that's what this part is right here. We can call it whatever we want. I'm just going to call it Twitch client. And it takes in one key value here, which is our user pool, which we just defined above, right? It's just user pool, which is here. And since our key and value are the same, that's why I dropped that off. You can create identity pools. This is super helpful if you have the concept of authenticated and unauthenticated roles. That's really, you're going to touch base on that when you're talking about S3. That's probably like the the hello world example there, where you have users who need access to the bucket, but they haven't authenticated in your app. We're not going to get that nitty gritty today, but let me know in the chat if you have any questions on that. So instead, I'm going to go ahead and remove this piece right here. And I think that makes the rest of this pretty simple, where I can delete a lot of this stuff. One of the questions I often get in the chat is, how do I console.log in the CDK? It's one of those beginner things that is kind of tricky to figure out if you're not used to it. But this is how you do it. You come over here and you say, hey, there's a construct that is amazing at this. And it's basically CloudFormation output. So CFN output, you say, hey, the context of this class that I'm working in, I have this key that I'm going to call user pool ID. And I want to go ahead and say the value that I want you to output is, in this case, user pool ID. And because I'm working in TypeScript, I get all that IntelliSense where I can sort of log out anything that's inside of here. And one of those things is just happens to be the user pool ID. We need that on our front end. We need to tell Amplify what user pool are we working in. And it's the same thing for the client. We have this user pool client ID. We need the ability to tell Amplify what web client we're working in as well. That's great. I think I got some errors up top in terms of importing things. It really just had to deal with this identity pool that we're not going to be using today. And same thing for these IAM permissions. Those go hand in hand. Aside from that, things look pretty good in terms of our auth piece. You'll notice that there isn't a whole lot of moving parts in here. We really just want to go ahead and sort of put it piece by piece. We'll come back to this backend stream once we get everything set up and compiled. But let's move on to, I was going to go database just because that's sort of low hanging fruit. But I think we actually should probably be going with our API. It's going to be probably the biggest piece of this application, and I want to make sure that we get through that. So let's head over there. Oh, we got some newcomers in the chat. Hey, what's up? Glad to see you. Made it. Bunch of cool cats today. Glad to see everybody. So I'm going to head back to my repo here, and I'm going to take a peek at this API stack that I created. So we have an auth stack. This is broken because it's like, hey, I thought you specified something called a backend stack. Technically, it's our auth stack that we'll come back to. But in the meantime, let's keep it broken for now. It's a good reminder that we need to fix it later on. And we're going to say that this is our API stack. Still working in TypeScript. We have all of that good stuff going on. So here's the fun part. We created Cognito, and hopefully you saw that it's really just a big config, right? But now we have to do something more involved. We need the ability to create an API, and not just any API, right? An Appsync API. So we have a GraphQL template that we're going to end up creating. And I'll show you what this looks like as we're scrolling through here. So we have this package, and I'm a big fan of it. This is what we're going to release. I'm giving you the inside scoop here. This is the upcoming Appsync package that'll make your life a little bit easier if you're creating an Appsync API. It's in alpha right now, but it's actually pretty feature complete. And the team let me know that they will be releasing this soon. I just can't give you the exact date. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and install this package. Here we go. Cool. So quick little recap. For folks that may have just been joining us, we have our front end in Amplify that we're going to be creating. This is a full stack application, but we're sort of splitting it out. We have the front end created with Amplify UI primitives in terms of UI components. We're going to be using the with authenticator component. But here's the thing. We're not going to create the backend in either the Amplify Studio or the Amplify CLI. For that, we're going to be using the CDK, which is what we're in right now. And we're going to tie it all together at the end. Be pretty fun. So we have that package and made that warning go away. You can see what we're using here. It's like, hey, we need access to Cognito. And I'll show you why in just a moment. But let's kind of scroll through and see what we have going on. We are first and foremost, everything after the super is what we take a look at. We're going to create a new GraphQL API. Now we can call this our sample to-do project. I think that's fine. We're going to create a to-do application after all. And that's the name that we're going to give our API as well. So this is sort of the project name, and then you have the actual name that the AWS console is going to look up. From here, we can go ahead and say, wait a minute, we have a schema that we're going to be using. And this is going to be in this directory. And then we are going to be using this name right here, schema.graphql, which if you went ahead and you used anything like, I guess, Amplify before, you know that schema.graphql is typically what we call it. Am I using Code Whisperer? I'm not. I need to get on that train just because I hear it's amazing, but really because I want to compare it to Copilot and just see what the experience is like. Have you used it though? I'm kind of curious myself. What the field has to say about that. Cool. So we have this. We have our schema created. Let's go ahead and just sort of type this out real quick. We're going to say type to do. Boom, boom. Every to do essentially has an ID. That's going to be of type ID. This part is just like Amplify, right? We're going to say it's required or can't be null. And then it's going to have a name, which is a string. And then we'll make the description optional. But that'll still be a string. Easy, easy peasy. One of the things that you often want to do though is say, like, hey, you have to log into my application to call this API. So to do that, I can come over here and I could say, so let's compare and contrast real quick, right? In Amplify, you'd want to say something like at model, and then I believe it's at auth, and that is enough. If I can get this right, auth, and then you would say something like, what is it? Like access private, something of that nature, right? But when you are working in Appsync, then you don't have the ability to have all that generated for you. You got to do it yourself. That model is what would eventually create the database. We'll have to create the database ourselves. And then with the authorization portion of it, well, we have to drop down and say at, and it is Amazon. I'm probably going to butcher this. User pool. I know for a fact that is 100% not the right thing. Let me pull it up right here. There we go. But yeah, this is probably a good opportunity to use Code Whisperer, right? AWS Cognito user pools. This directive right here is just like that @auth directive in Amplify. It's saying, hey, you have to be authenticated through Cognito to access me. And you can do other things like make sure that they're in a specific Cognito group. But for the sake of this tutorial, this walkthrough, this lovely session, we're going to go ahead and keep it just like this. All right, so we got that in place, and this is pretty much what our API would look like if we were in Amplify. But again, we're not. So let's specify, what someone can do in this application. So I'm going to say type. In terms of querying the API, we'll have something like we could say get to do. And get to do is going to take in, oh geez, what should it take in? An ID, I guess, of a to do, which is going to be a type ID, and it's going to return a to do, just like so. Then you probably have the ability to list to-dos as well. There we go. That doesn't need to take in anything. It'll just sort of scan the whole database. And hopefully we don't have too many there, but it's going to be an array of to-dos. Perfect. Querying is great, but how do we actually create them? Well, that's when our mutations come into play. So in here, we can call this whatever we want. And I'm going to call this create to do. And we're going to say it takes in to do input. So we'll say input of type to do input. We haven't created this yet. But it's still going to give me back a to do, right? And for the sake of time, I'm not going to implement anything like updating or um, any of that stuff. So creating a to-do, simple in that regard. Um, but we have to next, let's see here. Get one is pretty simple, listing, creating. What didn't I feel like I'm forgetting something. To do input. Input types are kind of special. You give it the input type in GraphQL land. There we go. And then like we have to say, what do you need to create this to do, right? Well, if I'm going to give you an ID, a name, and a description, if that's what I'm expecting, then I should probably make sure that I give that to you when I'm creating you. Now, the cool thing is that I can have that ID automatically generated. And I'll show you how to do that in just a moment. So really, I just want to make sure that I give you a name, then optionally, that description. There we go. Because I don't want the front end to be able to specify the ID because there could be conflicting IDs, right? So we'll keep it just like that. All right, so we have that in place. Let's head back to our API. And we kind of left off on this line here, where we're talking about this is our schema, but how do we want to authorize this thing? So to showcase, I have the default authorization type right here. It is our user pool. And then you can see how we're passing in the user pool. We're going to have to wire this up over in our bin directory. But for the meantime, you can see that we're taking in a prop of user pool. And because it's TypeScript, and we have to make sure that it knows what it's receiving, right above here, you are in fact taking in this prop. Now we aren't going to need this authenticated role. And that's because I'm getting rid of our secondary authorization mode right down here. So I have this as an example for folks that want to go ahead and add in additional either API keys or IAM permissions to their API. But in our case, we'll go ahead and take it out, but we'll leave logging there in case we ever did want to log something out to CloudWatch, in case errors and things like that arose. Okay, so creme de la creme. How do we specify those resolvers? Because with Amplify, it gets created for us. So in this case, I want to go ahead and have these data sources. It looks like I made a little error here. We're going to say const, and then we'll just call this like our to-do data source. And I want to set that equal to just this portion. Reason why, if I create these resolvers and I create a data source each and every time, I'm going to have a whole bunch of repetitive data sources. So I have our to-do data source. We're just creating that once. And now I can specify it right here. Cool, looks good. So let's walk through this. We have our sample to-do data source. It's going to be using, it's like which DynamoDB table am I going to be accessing? And we're going to say this sample table that we haven't created yet. Awesome. Inside of this, we're going to create this resolver. And it's like, how do I get access to whatever it is that you're trying to do? Well, the resolver, the connection point, is that when it comes to querying, on this field name that we're going to call, and it has to be called whatever you call it in your query, right? I think it was get to do. Maybe let's look back. Yeah, get to do, list to do's, create to do. These are the three resolvers that we're creating. When it comes to query, basically dot get to do. What do you want to do? And I can say the request mapping template, meaning how do I get the data, is going to be go ahead and call mapping template .dynamodb get item. And this is a cool little pairing. It's saying, hey, the primary key of the thing in DynamoDB, the thing that you're looking for, what key is it under? And it's under ID. I was like, awesome. Well, how do I make that connection though? Like, what is the key in your schema? In our case, it's actually going to be ID. Because if you look back on our schema, I said that when it comes to a to-do, it's going to have this ID right here. Great. And it's like, awesome. Well, if this is going to let me find it, how do I get it back to you? And fortunately, there's another helper that allow you to do just that. We have this response mapping template. This going to be mapping template.dynamodb result item. And this will automatically give it back to you. Pretty cool. So we're going to save that up. And then we're going to come back over here, and then we will do the same thing where we can get rid of this piece. And it's all the same resolver. It's this to do data source. And then we want the ability to list, right? So I can come over here and I can say, what was this called again? I have such a bad memory. List to dos. Yes. List to dos. This could be a little bit different because in our case, we don't need to specify any parameters going in. So it's like, how do we tell it that? Well, DynamoDB dot, and then you can sort of take a look at all of the items here. You can specify, just what you want to do. I want to go ahead and scan this DynamoDB table. Again, that we haven't created yet. And it's like, cool. Well, I scanned the table. What do you want me to do with that? How do you want me to respond? And I want you to respond in terms of Appsync can understand with a DynamoDB dot not result item, because I'm going to have more than one, right? DynamoDB dot, and then we'll say result list. Pretty cool. And again, there's this whole concept of VTL. We don't have to write any of it, which I'm a fan of. If you've written VTL before, you know what I mean. And let me know in the chat if you've written VTL before, because I'm super curious of how folks feel about it. And then we have one more item here. We have this resolver that we're going to create, except it's not a query, right? It's a mutation. And the field name that we're working with is going to be, field name is create do. And do I have example already? Yes, I do. Here we go. Actually, we can just use this one right here. To do. I'm going to delete this one before I get too confused. There we go. And let's move it right there. So I have this mutation. It's going to create the to-do for me. And then it's like, awesome. Well, in this case, what do you want me to do? And I want you to put an item in DynamoDB. And how the put item operation works is if it's there, it will update it for me. Otherwise, it will create a new record. Now, the parameters that you want to specify for this are actually pretty important. But I can say, hey, when it comes to that primary key that we're creating, go ahead and take a peek at it and automatically generate it. So I'm saying on a DynamoDB table, the primary key is ID, and I want that to be automatically generated, which is why, if you notice back in my schema, when it came to that to-do input, I didn't specify that I was going to pass in an ID. I could have, but it would have been optional because if I came over here, any new record that comes in is going to automatically be created. Yeah, looking at like never been comfortable with VTL. I do have a post up on sort of like the front-end developers guide to VTL if you're interested, but absolutely, I feel you there. Okay, so let's move along here. Response mapping template, same thing. Oh, I'm sorry, this part right here, right? Values that projecting input. This is essentially saying, take a look at that input that is coming in and automatically just take everything and put it on the record. So create the ID for me, take everything from input dot whatever, and attach that to the record. In our case, the name of the description. Cool. Awesome. Oh, Kurt, what's up? Thanks for joining. So when it auto generates the ID, what does the value look like that that it inserts? So we have two options that we can currently have auto generated in Appsync. We have a UUID, which is what gets generated here. And then if you hopped into VTL and you wanted to tweak that a little bit, it wouldn't be too difficult, but it would be a ULID. You can also attach those as well. Folks in the chat that are unfamiliar, ULIDs, they allow you to have sortable, but still unique IDs. Pretty cool. Awesome. So next up, what do we got going on? We're going to get rid of this grant query. Reason being is because we're not going to be dealing with any permissions. Again, we took off the S3 concept for the sake of time. And really, when it comes to outputting stuff, well, we don't have an API key. We got rid of the option. And Amplify is going to be looking for two things. We have our GraphQL API URL. Makes sense. Like, what is the endpoint that we're trying to hit up? And then we have our GraphQL API ID. And I'll show you why this matters, especially when you want to have all of your resolvers and your connection points automatically scaffolded by Amplify. That's still a super cool and very helpful way of connecting to your database. So we can save this up. Let's go ahead and hop over to the next part, which is going to be creating our database. So over here, we have our just quick little recap off stack, API stack. Now let's hop over to our, what can we call this? Like storage stack. That can get confusing if we ever did ask or add an S3, but we're not. So storage stack it is. Cool. Again, I'm cheating. I put in the chat the helpers for this scenario that we're diving in. Oh, I call it database stack. That was such a good name. Oh well, we'll keep it. So let's change that real quick. Database stack makes so much more sense. Cool. And let's take a peek at what we're working with, right? Nothing too fancy. I think creating a database in the CDK is one of the simplest things that you can do. So as we come over here, we can say we have our sample table. We're going to call it SampleDB. I'm a big fan of, and this is one of the differences between Amplify and the CDK, is that if you create your database in Amplify, it will not come with this removal policy. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing depends on your use case. But because it's a demo, I like attaching this so that way when I do destroy the CDK app after this session, it will automatically destroy the database as well, so you don't have lingering services. Billing mode, pay per request, and then the partition key, super important because I already created my API and I said that the partition key is going to be an ID. I'm going to set it up just like that. And from that, what we're going to export is just a reference to this table itself. You can see right here, read only, and that's what lets our API attach it as a data source. This is looking pretty good. I think we're in a healthy spot to go ahead and move along here. So I'm going to hop on over to our bin directory. And let's just switch this naming real quick because back in stream doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'm really explicit. I'm really visual. So I'm going to call this something like main backend. TypeScript. There we go. For the most part, we can keep this the same, except for cleaning this up a bit, right? We don't have a S3 bucket that we're dealing with. But we do have a database stack. We do have an API stack, but we took out the S3 portion of it, so we can get rid of that sample authenticated role. So in terms of what we have our off stack looking good. We took out the group names. I think that's fine. What are you complaining about up top? Oh, that's fine. Cool. We're just left with our 3 services. Now, did I make a goof in my code? I don't know. That's a good question. We can find out by deploying this. So let's clear this out, and then I'm just going to say npx AWS CDK. Then we'll say deploy. This is automatically going to synthesize it for me, so I am cheating a little bit. Cool. And let's see what we got. Yeah, didn't like that. Did I just mistype it? Module not found. Is it all? Right? I have more than one stack. Let's scroll up top. I can't find module / backend stream.ts. Oh, I know. You gotta be switched. Cool. So let's do a full search. Backend -stream. And who's complaining about this? Right over here. That should be fine. What else we got? There we go. So when this got set up, it was automatically going to be looking for that backend stream. We switched this up, right? We call it main backend. So I didn't know how to bundle my TypeScript code from there. Probably a good thing that we check that. And then we want to deploy all of our stacks. Looking good. I think it's doing its thing. There we go. So the important part of this is how do we read this in terms of Amplify, right? How does our front end take advantage of this? So, oh no, we're rolling back already. Who's dependent on what? This is what happens when I copy and paste code, right? Our off stack looks like it has a reference to a file storage stack. That's probably because of my imports. So let's head over here and what do we got? Let's do maybe Control F real quick for file storage. Not seeing anything. Let's search everything in that case. I didn't find it also. That's weird. No worries. Just check out the error. Yeah, that's a lot of red. Okay, so where are you blowing up at? Off stack region. The stack named off stack failed to deploy. Yep, we got that part. But why? Because you're still referencing the backend stream. Looks like. So let's come over here. Stream. I didn't see where that was referenced. Help me out, chat. Did you see anywhere where we're saying anything about the backend stream? Because it looks like that's what it's looking for. What do we got? What do we got? Anything in the chat? I'm not seeing anything. That's okay. We can figure this out. What I would do is, what props are you taking in? All of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go to our main backend. API stack. Hold on. Are you not imported? Okay. All kinds of things going on. No worries. Boom. You are capitalized. So let's just clean this up a little bit before I mess this part up. API stack is initialized, looking good. I don't see anything about the off stack on why that would be the error. Let's see here. And it's always at the finish line, right? Looking good. Looking good. User pool ID, fine. What would be the problem? Okay. Are we maybe referencing something from a file we shouldn't? No, these all look good. Found you, you, and you. Well, you failed for something. Failed to deploy. Huh. Will we get a new error if we did? This should say, this should complain, right? It should be like, hey, you got to specify all. Okay, cool. So then let's just do our auth stack. And what was the issue? Okay. So we have the account, we have the region. It's starting. And then it's like, yeah. Oh, cannot be deleted. It's in use. Oh, do I already have this named that? Okay. That's helpful. So it looks like if we come over here and we say something like Awstack, let's just say stream. And then for the client, we can say stream. I'm just changing the names here. Okay, and then that's what we're outputting. So let's try it maybe again. Oh my goodness, if it was a naming collision this whole time. The pain. Export Awstack. Exports output ref. Why do I have chat user pool? I think I see the error. Oh. Maybe this is the weird one, chat. There we go. Let's see what we got here. I don't see anything in here that would mess it up. Oh my goodness. Backend bin/backend stream. Oh. All right. Hey, backend. This is what I get for changing like one thing, right? Cool. Let's do one more like can we find it thing. Name is fine. Then all of this stuff looks fine. Cool. Whoops, don't want to mess with this file. Okay, let's try this. My bin directory looked like it was still pointing to backend stream. Uh-oh, I think that's still going to blow up though. This should be main backend, right? I'm not going to save though. Okay, well, now I can save. Woo, cheese and rice. Go. Yeah, I appreciate it. Appreciate it, Bobby Tables. Oh, did I? Thank you. Good call. Cool. The other ones look fine. Looks like it was just this one that's really. But my hope is that that's all it was. Okay, outside of that, I'm stuck. Oh my goodness. Okay. What is this error though? Exports output ref. Identity pool authenticated role. But I thought I took out all the authenticated roles. Right? Okay, so this isn't referencing anything about an authenticated role. So what do we do when we get stuck? We go back to like the GitHub repo that I created. What did I change? I don't think anything really changed. I appreciate the help though in the chat. Bobby, for keeping your eyes open on that stuff. This is odd. This is a new one for me because it's not anything in. I mean, I was gonna blame the computer. I was gonna say it's not anything in my code. Like it's not my code doing this. No, it clearly is. But it's not a very clear message into what's going on. That's okay. I wonder if it would do it if I picked a different stack. Or if it's just like the off stack that's giving me some trouble here. Let's do our, what is it? API stack? Is it all capitalized? See what that gets us. Oops, I must have misspelled it. Lowercase. Okay. Oh my goodness. What did I call you then? Tell me. That is one of the things, right? When you start contrasting Amplify with CDK, it's like a lot of the hand holding. Here we go. Appsync API stack. We really take care of on the Amplify side, which is a huge benefit of using Amplify, right? You don't have to worry about some of this stuff. We make a lot of assumptions. We have a lot of opinions, but opinions are good. And we do that for you. Okay, so this gives me the same error that I know there's like a meta issue going on, right? Where I'm keeping along some kind of config, doing something like that. Okay, here we go. So it can't be used because it's already used by a file storage stack. So this is like a config thing. Because I created these fresh, but when I look at like my main backend, this is fine. They're all pulling from here, like looks good, but it's reading like an old file that I must have lingering around somewhere. Maybe in the CDK JSON. Okay. So it's like, boom, look at your node backend, looks good. Is it maybe the CDK out folder? Could be a rebel and delete it. Okay. And okay, so it's going to regenerate that CDK out folder, which wasn't in source control now that I think about it. So that probably wasn't it. Use. That is a tough one, chat. I'm not sure. I'm going to have to go ahead and debug this one. The cool thing is that the repo that I shared, all the constructs are used to sync together. So you don't really have to touch it. You don't have to do anything. It'll just work. Let's see here. Otherwise, it's kind of a big showcase of me flubbing. It's not the names. We changed the names. What is it? I'm all open to delete the entire stack and then redeploy it. Oh, that's good call. Right? What if I just come into here? Boom. In case there was something lingering. Pro Evils, I appreciate that. All. Which ones? Just delete them. Delete them all. Yes. Cool. Oh, I think that makes complete sense, right? If I cloned it from GitHub, it already had everything, right? Like look at it, it's destroying stuff. Oh no, how did you fail to destroy? As it's used in the auth stack. So then delete the auth stack first. That makes sense because I cloned this from GitHub. I already have this project set up on my computer. Like I've obviously like pushed this up for my computer before. Oh, that's frustrating. I should have known better. Is there like a force in use?
Can I watch YouTube?
Sorry, special guest on the show. That's an odd one. We have 2 minutes left. I'm gonna go ahead and mess around with this for a little bit more. Ooh, that's super frustrating. That's what you're completely right, Pro Evils. Like if I clone this from GitHub, then I should have been more cautious and deleting like the meta files that were associated with it, because it's definitely pulling in like an old stack. Because as you saw, we went ahead and we deleted the file storage stack. Complete noob move on my mistake. But that's why I love streaming, because I get to learn. So let's go ahead and we'll pause here. And I'm gonna go ahead and showcase in the future how you can definitely get this deployed a lot easier than me making my silly flubs along the way. But no, as always, let me go ahead and bring in the full chat here. Cool. Well, as always, no, I appreciate your time. I appreciate the learning. Streaming is bi-directional in terms of the education that gets put out. So thank you all for your time. I'll check you out next time. And we'll just continue along, showcasing different mistakes. How about that? Perfect. Thanks again. I'll catch you all later.